Most of us fish based on what we've been told for years. Hand-me-down wisdom passed from one boat to the next. Bass love grass in summer. They stack up on deep structure once winter hits. They come back to the same spots year after year like clockwork. I've heard all of it, said most of it myself, and honestly, believe most of it too. I remember guiding a father-son trip a few summers back, where we found bass stacked practically on top of each other in one tiny channel, and neither one of us could explain why until I started digging into research like this. It made me realize how much of what we call knowledge out here is really just repetition, stuff that gets passed down without anyone ever checking if it's actually true. But here's the thing. A 2-year radio tracking study on largemouth bass actually puts real data behind those ideas, and it challenges a few of them in ways I didn't expect. After 30 years of fishing ponds and reservoirs, I've seen patterns that line up with some of this research, and I've seen plenty that don't. That's what got me digging into this study in the first place. I'm Travis from Green Valley Anglers, and in this video, I'm going to break down what this peer-reviewed study actually found, where bass live by season, what kind of cover they prefer, how tightly they group up, and whether they really do return to the same places year after year. Then, once we've gone through the data, I'll show you exactly how to put that information to work on your own water. Let's start with how this study was actually done, because the setup matters here. Researchers tracked 27 largemouth bass, ranging from 14 to 20 inches, in Lake Eugenia, Ontario, for more than 16 months, using radio transmitters surgically implanted in the fish. That's a serious commitment, over a year of consistent tracking on the same individual bass. What makes this lake especially interesting is that it's a drawdown reservoir, meaning the water level drops significantly every winter. That created a pretty unique, and honestly pretty valuable, window into how bass respond when huge areas of cover get exposed to open air and then flooded again come spring. The researchers classified the habitat into 4 main types: submerged aquatic vegetation at different densities, woody cover like laydowns and stumps, shoals or humps, and open barren flats with basically no cover at all. They didn't just track once and call it done either. Tracking happened multiple times throughout each season, so this data reflects real, repeated movement across winter, spring, summer, and fall, not a single snapshot. This isn't somebody's opinion after one good or bad trip. This is repeated location data on the same individual fish, tracked across 2 full years. Now here's where it gets interesting. The biggest seasonal difference in this whole study showed up in how tightly the bass grouped together. In winter, the fish clustered up tight. About 74% of the tracked bass were found inside a relatively small 27-acre area, and most of them were sitting on those barren, open flats. That kind of concentration is huge for us as anglers, because it means winter bass can be way more predictable once you actually locate the right zone. Find that pocket, and you've probably found a good chunk of the population. Spring flipped the script completely. As the fish moved into spawning mode, they spread out across shallow areas all over the lake. There was very little tight grouping at all. Everybody kind of does their own thing during the spawn. Summer landed somewhere in the middle, with moderate grouping. Bass concentrated in certain productive zones, specific corners and bays that offered the best mix of cover and depth together. Fall was, without question, the most unpredictable season in the whole study. One year the fish stayed relatively close together. The very next year, they scattered over much larger distances across the lake. That tells me fall is more of a transitional, migratory period, where bass are actively repositioning rather than settling in. That unpredictability is honestly one of the biggest reasons fall gets a reputation as a tough, technical season to fish. You're not just adjusting to changing weather and dropping water temperatures, you're adjusting to fish that are actively deciding where they want to spend the winter. And that decision-making process looks different from year to year, depending on conditions. Cover preference is where I think a lot of us have some outdated assumptions, myself included. In winter, bass heavily preferred those barren flats. Nearly 94% of winter locations were on open, coverless bottom in the deeper remaining water after the drawdown. No grass, no wood, just open bottom. Come spring, the fish favored shoals, bare bottom, and low-density vegetation. They largely avoided the thick weed beds during the spawn, which honestly surprised me a little. Summer is when dense vegetation finally becomes the priority. About half of all summer locations were in moderate to high density weeds, with the rest split between shoals and more open water. Fall was mixed, and honestly, the least predictable in terms of cover. Bass used low density weeds, shoals, and barren flats without showing any single strong preference. And woody cover? Used surprisingly little across the entire study. It mainly showed up in spring and summer, and even then, it wasn't a dominant choice. Shoals, on the other hand, were more important in spring and fall, especially when they sat close to vegetation. Now let's talk about something every angler wants to know. Do bass actually come back to the same spots? Site fidelity, meaning how likely a fish is to return to the same general area, was strongest in winter and summer. A lot of the same fish were relocated within 100 to 250 yards of where they'd been the previous year during those seasons. That's remarkably tight for a body of water this size. Fall fidelity was much weaker, with average distances between year-to-year locations sitting around 500 yards. Spring data was a little harder to interpret because some fish had been experimentally relocated as part of the study, but even with that noise, the overall picture still showed bass returning to familiar areas. Here's the part that really stuck with me. In one portion of the study, 3 bass were moved more than a mile across the lake during winter. All 3 of them found their way back to their original wintering area within just 4 to 12 days. That tells you bass have a genuinely strong ability to navigate back to preferred zones, even after being displaced a significant distance. To me, that's one of the most compelling findings in the whole study. It suggests these fish aren't just wandering around randomly hoping to bump into a good spot. They're operating with some kind of internal map of the lake, built from experience, that reliably guides them back to proven wintering grounds, even after being pulled far outside their normal range. So how do I actually use this information out on the water? Let me break it down season by season. In winter, I'm looking for the deeper, more stable basins or trenches that remain after any water level drop. Since the fish group up so tightly this time of year, once you find the zone, you can work it thoroughly instead of running all over the lake. In spring, I'm focusing on hard bottom, sparse cover, and the first available spawning flats, rather than burying myself in thick grass. That matches exactly what this study found. In summer, I want the edges of denser vegetation mixed with nearby deeper or harder bottom. That specific combination showed up again and again in the data, and it lines up with what's worked for me for years. In fall, I stay mobile. The fish are more spread out and less tied to any single type of cover, so I'm covering water rather than camping on one spot. And don't forget the bigger takeaway here. Bass are genuinely capable of returning to the same general areas year after year. Learning a lake's key zones and refining your understanding of them over multiple seasons still pays off big time, even if the exact spot shifts a little from year to year. I've got waypoints on my own home lake that I've refined over more than a decade of fishing it, season after season. Every single year, those same general areas still produce, even when the weather, the water clarity, and everything else on the lake seems to be doing something completely different. That's the power of paying attention over the long haul instead of chasing whatever's trending that week. This tracking study gives us real hard data instead of assumptions passed down from one angler to the next. Bass cluster tightly in winter on those open, deeper flats. They spread out for the spawn in spring. They lean into denser weeds in summer, and they become far more mobile once fall rolls around. On top of all that, they show meaningful fidelity to certain areas across multiple years. When you match your locations to these seasonal tendencies, you're going to spend a lot less time fishing empty water and a lot more time in front of fish that are actually there. If this helped you rethink where fish live throughout the year, drop a comment and tell me what patterns you've noticed on your home lake. I read and reply to every single comment. Subscribe to Green Valley Anglers for more science-backed bass fishing strategies. Hit the bell so you never miss a new video, and share this one with someone who's still fishing the same spots the same way every single season. Tight lines out there. Travis, signing off.